So I'm willing to bet that literally everybody watching this video right now has at least heard of the game that we're going to be talking about for today's video. The reason for that being is, well, Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance is a super infamous game. Whether it be for the memes or the actual gameplay, there's a lot to love about this game. I mean, visually it's an absolute feast. The dynamic and bombastic gameplay makes it really fun to play and both watch. And even if not intended, a lot of the characters have aged in a way where it's not bad, but it's just really funny looking at it with a more modern lens. Thus, they are really meme-worthy, and it's super easy to make, like, pretty much anything anybody says in this game an absolute joke. But in a good way, like the good kind of joke that's funny to share with, you and the boys. It also really helps that the music in this game slaps to an undeserving level. Like, I don't think there's any game that has the right of banging out music as good as this on a consistent basis. Like, the entire soundtrack is just all bangers. And unfortunately, I won't be able to use any of them in the video because this video will get taken down in 2.5 seconds. But if you just need some good music to listen to, you like your rock/metal type music, make sure you just go look up this playlist, and yeah, I just did you a favor. Enjoy all the songs if you haven't heard them already. All that being said, you guys should pretty much know about the characters that we're going to be talking about today, but I bet a lot of people have not actually thought and sat down and looked at how strong and how fast and what abilities these characters have, because you might just look at them as like the haha funny meme characters, or you might be seeing Raiden throwing these giant 9,000 ton mechs around and being like, dang, that's pretty strong, but not really look into it any further than that. Well, that's my whole job. My whole job is to look at these characters and determine how strong they are by looking at, well, their strength, speed, and abilities, and then I'll tell you how strong they would be both in-verse and in cross-verse matches. Now, I will be honest, this video was originally supposed to cover Senator Armstrong, the man of the hour, the actual meme lord himself, but because I also really wanted to talk about the inverse scaling, it actually makes a little bit more sense to kind of talk about Raiden as the video's topic, because he actually fights everyone throughout the series and you can see him slowly progressing. Technically, I still could have done that with either Jetstream Sam or with Senator Armstrong, but Raiden just makes a little bit more sense because he's the protagonist of the game. So forgive me for that. Maybe I'll use Armstrong in like a versus video or something. You guys can drop ideas in the comments down below. I also wanted to say that I'm pretty much just looking at Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance for all the content of this video, but I did go exploring in some of the other Metal Gear games to get context for some things, like when they talked about his blade being able to bisect things at a plank level. You bet your Cheeto dust have an ass that I went and looked into that immediately, because there ain't no way I'm letting something like that slip by. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and just start diving right into this video. Firstly, talking about where he stands from an inverse perspective. So in this game, there's basically 5 major people that Raiden has to contest in the game. 5 major bosses, if you will, that are pretty much going to affect where he stands in verse. And one of those bosses, who I mentioned a couple minutes back, Jetstream Sam, kind of puts Raiden in his place very early on in the game. In fact, after the first mission, Raiden foolishly picks a fight with Sam and is pretty much left for dead on the back of a train. This isn't actually surprising at all if you know anything about Sam. He has a very short DLC where Sam takes on Armstrong and not only kind of figures out what his abilities and everything are like, but he actually manages to bypass them by cutting off Armstrong's hand before his nanomachines can actually react to it and harden his skin, making Sam one of the most built different characters in the entirety of the game. I mean, there's a reason they gave him his own DLC. But for anyone that hasn't played the game or watched any of the cutscenes or anything like that, just know that Raiden trying to fight Sam at the beginning of the game is like Ichigo trying to fight Byakuya at the end of the Substitute arc. You know, it wasn't going to go very well at all. But what this does do is it leads to Raiden pretty much getting his first major amp for the entirety of the game. He gets 2 amps, technically 3 if you count the very end against Armstrong. But the first major amp that he gets, the first major thing that is buffing his power, is that he gets a new cyborg suit. And after getting this suit, he kind of demonstrates how strong he has now become with his new cybernetic enhancements, and he goes and fights the first major boss of the game. We're just going to call her Lady, because she's literally there for like 5 seconds. Yeah, Raiden pretty much pulls up on her, beats her up, and is like, yep, I am now a little bit more built different. I now actually can compete with these new higher-end cyborg people. He then goes to fight someone named Monsoon. Monsoon basically being the Metal Gear equivalent of Magneto, being able to like chuck giant metallic objects at Raiden. This is also where Raiden gets one of his best speed feats, we'll talk about that later. But as he's fighting Monsoon, he's kind of on the back foot. He seems to be losing the fight, and that is until Monsoon basically forces Raiden to start being more true to himself. See, Raiden as a kid was like a child soldier, natural born killer type person, but in the current day, he's trying to suppress that because Raiden's got a family. He doesn't want to be some insane psychopath around them. He just kind of wants to live his normal life and be a hero of justice, all that good jazz. But Monsoon wants him to be more true to himself and tries to bring him back to his original self. And this is when we get Raiden's Ripper mode, named after the fact that his name is Jack. When he was a kid, he was known as Jack the Ripper. And so his amped mode is called Jack the Ripper. I know, insanely complex naming schemes in my Metal Gear game. Regardless if you like the name or not, it does pretty much amp him to an insane level because after he gets this form, he just tears Monsoon apart. In fact, after this, he goes and fights Big Tex and also just kind of dismantles Big Tex as well, letting him tear through pretty much 3 of the like major bosses in the game with relative ease after A, getting a new cybernetic body that allows him to compete, and 2, quote-unquote becoming a completed character, right? Kind of like coming full circle and accepting that the whole hero of justice thing is kind of some BS, and that he really just likes fighting people, right? Again, complex writing only. This is basically my shonen battle anime, but with mechs, and you know what? I'm down for it. However, this is when we actually get the rematch against Raiden and Jetstream Sam. See, for plot reasons, Raiden's in kind of a rush. He's got to get to Pakistan to stop the US president from getting assassinated, standard 80s movie writing tropes, and I'll stop making the comparisons now, but he's got to get there and he's in a hurry. But Sam is there waiting for him. Sam wants his rematch, because as the game has been going on, Raiden and Sam have been having this back and forth about why it is they fight, essentially. Like, even the characters themselves start poking fun at it at some point. Raiden's like, I can't believe I flew half across the world to get beat up by some other samurai dude, while also talking about philosophy, right? But now Raiden, with his new Ripper mode, with his new constructed body, and now kind of being a quote-unquote completed character, is able to overcome Sam, after which Raiden's dog, which, yeah, didn't even mention that he has a metallic dog, takes Sam's sword and is going to save that for later, as Raiden is in a bit of a rush and has got to go fight Senator Armstrong, who's got this giant mech that was basically built to sustain himself in the nuclear holocaust that was to come, and Raiden starts hacking that apart and starts flipping it around all over the place. And then and only then does Senator Armstrong emerge, and he basically just obliterates Raiden for like the majority of their fight. I mean, he takes Raiden's sword, snaps it, just beats the crap out of him for like 10 minutes. And it's only after Raiden's dog gives him the blade that Sam was using, which is like some super high frequency blade thing that we'll talk about when we get to the abilities. It's only then that he's actually able to kill Armstrong. In fact, he ends up killing him in one of the most raw ways possible. He literally impales his chest with his bare hand and rips his still beating heart out and crushes it. It's pretty raw. And it's kind of like Sam and Raiden coming together is able to overcome Armstrong, because individually neither of them were able to actually beat Armstrong. Sam in his DLC, while he does kind of figure out what Armstrong is all about and is able to at least cut his arm off, he's still unable to actually finish Armstrong off. Same thing for Raiden. Raiden's kind of able to fight and stay in the heat of battle with Armstrong for a good amount of time. He just literally can't do anything to put the guy down. But when these two kindred spirits kind of put their differences aside and work together in a way, they're able to overcome and kill Armstrong. So that's kind of the inverse scaling. I know it sounded like we were jotting all over the place, but keep in mind, this is like a 2013 game. There's like 4 hours of story, 4.5 with the DLC. And I know I sound like I'm describing a fever dream right now, but it is definitely worth to go check out on your own. There's plenty of videos online that just have like the entirety of the game with all the cutscenes, and I assure you, it's a fun time. You know, you get some buddies together, get some popcorn, it's a fun experience. But regardless, Raiden by the end of the game should pretty much be like the top tier guy. Although, if you're going to say that he's kind of fighting by himself and is not going to be receiving Sam's sword, then it'd be like Armstrong is number 1, Raiden's number 2, and Sam is like a close 3, followed by the rest of the goobers. With the inverse scaling being established, let's go ahead and start talking about the stuff you guys really care about, and that is the actual cross versus strength, speed, and abilities that Raiden possesses. So this is where things actually get a little bit nutty, because I'm assuming most people would look at Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance and just assume that, I don't know, maybe the characters are like building level or something, maybe like multi-city block if you've seen some of the gifs of them like throwing giant mechas around. I'm gonna tell you right now, that is kind of where they start. Like, the base ground floor for a lot of these characters is going to be like high-end multi-city block. Because Raiden apparently just has a thing for throwing around giant, like, 9,000 pound mechs and just casually tossing them around like they're nothing. In fact, in that final battle with Armstrong, while Armstrong's still in the mech we were mentioning, this dude, like, lops off one of the blades of the mech and then just starts wielding that around and starts sword fighting the mech with it, with, like, this giant mech blade that is about 20 times the size of him. But it gets more insane than that, because in the fourth Metal Gear game, apparently while he was severely damaged and missing an arm, he stopped a submarine by just kind of standing in front of it and just pushing his weight up against it, which was also calced at being multi-city block. And this is before Raiden gets all of like his new fancy upgrades and everything, so this should be like a much weaker Raiden. I mean, barring the fact that he's also injured from a fight and missing an arm when he performed that feat, the Raiden in Revengeance is not only that Raiden, but healthy, right? He's put together, but then he also has an upgrade on top of all of that. Now here's where things get a little bit insane. So first and foremost, let's talk about the Excelsis mech that he actually fights. That's the big one that we've just been talking about, where Armstrong is in there, right? It's like the big Mac Daddy of all the mechs. See, the reason this is kind of interesting is that A, Raiden is able to like cut Excelsis apart pretty casually with his sword and everything. He's able to like throw it around. This is a mech that is designed to survive nuclear wars. So that's kind of the whole point of what this mech was designed to do, meaning it should be able to tank blasts and stuff from nuclear bombs, which could be anywhere from like town to city level. I mean, if we want to get really crazy, it could even start like venturing into like mountain level if we're talking about some of the more insane nuclear weapons that mankind has developed. Especially given that Metal Gear is a very more futuristic type series and plays pretty fast and loose with actual what technology could do in the future. But funny enough, there was an official poll where if you don't find the whole like, oh, it's supposed to be able to survive like nuclear wars and whatever, there's an official poll on the Metal Gear website that is no longer up because this game is like 10 years old at this point. But it is still documented that it was a poll between Excelsis and Metal Gear D, where Excelsis won with 61.86% of the votes. And the thing that's funny about that is that Excelsis possesses no nuclear weapons of its own, but Metal Gear D does. In fact, it's listed as both their strength and weakness. A weakness for Excelsis is that it has no nuclear armaments, but D has a strength of actually possessing nuclear armaments, meaning through their own like official poll, and that wasn't really denied by any of the developers or anything in any way whatsoever, they seem to think that, yeah, Excelsis could not only fight but beat this other Metal Gear that possesses nuclear weapons. Logically, it would probably get blasted by one of those throughout the fights. The fact that it's listed as both a pro and con on both sides does mean it was considered, and the thing was also built to survive nuclear war. So, like, basically, Raiden is able to hack apart, lift, and throw a giant mech that is able to take nukes. Which, again, depending on the nuclear weapon, could be anywhere from town level to mountain level, depending on how insane we want to get here. If you want something a little more stable, there actually is a calc for Raiden fighting the Boxer that puts him at large town. So again, more in that upper range for town closer to city, which again kind of supports what we're talking about with Excelsis. The reason it's calc so high is due to the weight of the Boxer that he's fighting and how fast he's able to hack it apart and the speed at which he's able to send chunks of the Boxer flying. You know, kind of think like a grenade. And due to the mentioned values that I just kind of went over, it puts him at around large town level. So again, at like a very casual level, you have them being multi-city block. I guess you could say a high end would be like city to mountain level if you really want to go a little bit higher with the Excelsis stuff, but then pretty consistently he should be in that large town level. The neat thing about this as well is that a lot of the other characters that you probably care about, like Sam and Armstrong, do scale to this as well. Sam literally beat the Raiden that performed the multi-city block level feat. He's also not only able to fight Raiden pretty well, almost to like a standstill where it came down to like the last move, but again, he was also able to fight Armstrong himself. And then for Armstrong, I mean, he literally just beat the crap out of Raiden for like 10 minutes. So I think that definitely means they scale to one another. If not, Armstrong being a lot higher for stuff that I outlined in the actual inverse scaling bit. So on that note, let's move over to speed. Speed is something that people actually might have a pretty accurate grasp on because it's really common to see Raiden deflecting bullets or other characters in the game deflecting bullets, and Raiden actually uses lightning and electricity in a lot of his attacks, so you might also assume that he's around the speed of lightning. Well, he's actually a little bit faster than lightning and actually has a calc that puts him in these sub-relativistic tiers. That's 8% of the speed of light, which is really insane. So let's talk about some of these feats, and probably the baseline one that we want to talk about is the fact that Raiden does indeed actually use lightning and coordinates it with a lot of his attacks. So just kind of that on its own lays the groundwork for him being able to move that fast. But again, it's not conclusive, but it does lay the groundwork there because it would make a lot of sense if you're a character that uses electricity / lightning, that you would have some ability to react to it, but it's, again, not concrete proof. So let's move to something that Raiden does at the very beginning of the game. Yeah, before he actually gets his suit upgrade. He performs a feat that is Mach 1658, which is really insane because lightning is only 1282. So it's actually a decent bit faster than lightning's average speed. And how he does this? Well, he actually just runs and jumps across several dozen missiles as he is fighting this, go figure, giant mech. I know it's really surprising to be seeing Raiden fight a mech, but that's where he gets one of his better casual speed feats. Again, very good because this is before he actually gets his upgrades, before he gets Ripper mode, any of that stuff. So this should pretty much just be his baseline speed. But we actually do know that he should be getting faster because later on in the game, when he's fighting Monsoon, even though I kind of skipped over that for, scaling purposes because it's really only there for him to get Ripper mode, he actually does perform a really insane speed feat here. Because we actually see during this fight, we see the rain in the background slow down to a halt as if time is standing still, and we can actually calc how fast Raiden is moving in comparison to the actual raindrops to find out how fast he's actually moving. The long and short of it is that he's moving at around 2 to 3% the speed of light. Again, pretty insane. This does lay the groundwork for any future installments that have Raiden. If he just gets even a few times faster, he's going to be pushing into those light speed ranges. And for him being in the tier that he's in, I mean, most town level characters are averaging the speed of lightning. The fact that he's pushing into relativistic tiers is ridiculous, right? Because it means he's going to speed blitz a lot of people in his tier, which in that vein kind of makes Raiden very similar to an Iki character that I did a couple months back. But yeah, aside from that, it's really straightforward. There's nothing else really weird going on here. It's no, we were just able to pretty easily calculate how fast Raiden is. The game pretty much just blatantly handed it to us on a silver platter, and we were just yep, thanks, buddy. But we'll go ahead and finish this video off by talking about what Raiden can do, and Raiden, for lack of a better term, has a very odd assortment of abilities. Also, if it seems like the abilities aren't organized in a specific order, it's because they're not. I was kind of just taking notes as we were going through the game, and as I just started jumping through rabbit holes and looking at random clips from other Metal Gear Solid games to get more information on some abilities that he had. So, first and foremost, he has some form of electric manipulation. We see him shoot and zap lightning at people on some Emperor Palpatine energy when he returns in the 4th game. We also know that he can use this to amp his attacks, because the funny meme where Raiden is punching Armstrong and he's not able to do anything and Armstrong's just standing there like a Chad? Well, apparently right after that, he continues to amp his punches with his electricity, and then he double fists Armstrong and is able to push him back a couple of meters. That's pretty good because prior to that, as we see, he's not even budging Armstrong a single inch. He also possesses a technique called Zandatsu, which allows him to steal this electrolyte energy thing against other cyborgs and replenish his own strength. So I guess if he's fighting any other mecha people, they should be looking out for that because he's going to steal their guts and then eat them. We learn from Sam as he and Raiden are having one of their philosophical debates that the nanomachines that they have inside of them, because they're mostly nanomachines at this point, well, Raiden is, Sam is just that built different that he's barely got any augmentations, but that's a whole different video for another time. Basically, the augmentations that they have can block out any emotion, so if you need to become just an absolute sociopath, or, I don't know, you're fighting a Red Lantern or something that's trying to make you big angry, I guess in that scenario, these nanomachines would be really good because you can just blot that out and make yourself completely emotionless and then be fine in that avenue. So Emotional manipulation is something that comes up. He's immune to it. The nanomachines can also nullify all pain by just turning off your pain receptors. This can be really good and kind of function as like a battle continuation from the Fate series, where you can kind of just keep fighting through like excessive amounts of pain, or like you lose an arm and you can just keep fighting unimpaired. It's a really nice combo for just like how much durability Raiden shows with the entire series. Like, again, Armstrong, who is like significantly stronger than him, pretty much just beats the crap out of him for like 10 minutes. And so having like the ability to turn off those pain receptors is definitely really helpful in scenarios like that, where you're fighting someone that's potentially a little stronger than yourself. We also know that Raiden's suit, if for whatever reason he becomes breathing impaired, so like he has no access to oxygen, will supply oxygen to his bloodstream to keep him going for a short amount of time. So trying to like drown him in water, if you're like Juvia from Fairy Tail or something, isn't going to work, at least in the short term. I guess if you could hold him down for a day or so, it doesn't specify an amount of time, just a short amount of time. If you can lock him down for any significant amount of time, you'll probably be able to kill him, but if you can only do it for like a couple of minutes, probably not going to work. That's really nice. He also has like self-repair kits, as his allies mentioned early on in the game, that he could just pick up and find self-repair kits. Now, obviously, this is not like some infinite inventory character, right? But it would be fair to assume that he could bring like maybe one of these to a battle, right? And he could use it to kind of repair himself as he's fighting. Might be something notable in his like standard equipment. We also know that his original suit just provided him an insulation that protected him from all toxins, so you can't pull a Walter White and try to feed this guy ricin or something. They don't mention poisons, and I'm not sure if that's like a translation error or something, because you would assume it was like poisons and toxins, because they are different things. Toxins being something that you ingest, and poisons being something that is like done to you, like a snake bite. Snakes are poisonous, but like dart frogs are toxins, right? Kind of like in that avenue. Again, not sure if that's just like a translation error, because you'd think he'd be immune to both, given the whole fact that he is a cyborg and all, but I don't know, maybe they were just like, nope, it's just the toxins, not the poisons. Regardless, moving on, he is also pretty much fireproof. He took a plasma-based attack from Ray, which is like some Metal Gear big mech dude. The reason this is important is not because of the mech, it's because of the plasma. Plasma is insanely hot, for lack of a better term, usually being around 11 to 14,000 degrees Fahrenheit, while the sun's surface is like 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit, for a little bit of perspective. Not anywhere close to the like core of the sun, because the core of the sun gets into like the millions of degrees Fahrenheit, but still rather insane that he's able to kind of just shrug off heat of that level. So unless you're actually like built different Yamamoto over here, you're probably not doing anything to Raiden with heat. But now things are going to get a little bit weird when we start talking about his detection abilities as well, because Raiden has pretty insane detection abilities. And when I say insane, I mean insane and weird for like a scientific, futuristic type game. So obviously he's got like the insane radar where he can utilize the electromagnetic waves coming from living beings to map out an area. He can see through walls. He's got night vision, all that good stuff, right? But then he's able to detect and see like cloaked and invisible enemies. In fact, one of his allies just says, oh yeah, I guess like cloaked / invisible people are not going to be a problem for someone like you. Which is really insane, it's really good, but this is just where it gets even more insane. He's also able to detect ghosts. Yeah, that's right, this mech dude can detect ghosts, because apparently the Metal Gear series, and I went down a huge rabbit hole looking into this, throws in ghosts of other characters as like Easter eggs and stuff, and so you can find a lot of these ghosts as you're like running around in these games. And while I think it's strange, again, I haven't really played a whole lot of the Metal Gear franchise, so maybe it's a beloved Easter egg that everybody likes, maybe it's cool to see some of the past characters, but now it is oddly given Raiden the ability to detect astral beings. So he could just be walking around and see some orange-haired samurai guy just walking around on some building and be like, hey, what's up, dude? Which, I don't know, just feels very strange to me, but also kind of fitting based on everything we've talked about in this video so far. On that same note of detection, he's also got, like, insane emotional awareness, but not from, like, you know, obviously some weird power or anything. It's based on tech. He's able to, like, record people's body temperature, their heart rate, their sweat secretion, stuff like that. Like, basic things that can kind of tell you what someone's emotional state and where they might be like mentally and stuff like that. Like if they're trying to like remain really calm, but he's like, well, I've detected that on your forehead you have sweated 2 beads of sweat. Seems like you're getting a little bit nervous over there, buddy. So he can determine stuff like that, which is good for determining intent. And between him being able to pretty much cut off all emotions and always be able to determine the intent of those that he's fighting, it pretty much gives him a nice overlapping coverage on like the whole emotional manipulation, whether it be like an actual power or someone that just has insanely high charisma, like Senator Armstrong. Also, in the vein of equipment, he has EMP grenades, which are literally exactly what they sound like. They are EMPs. They can shut down technologically based items. But if he ever runs out of grenades, after beating up Monsoon, he took one of his Dystopia blades, and it has a similar EMP effect if he is out of grenades. He can use that. So when fighting other technologically based fighters, he has a pretty good out to being able to just take them out with some EMPs. Literally the Batman versus Iron Man argument, right? Just throw an EMP at him. Easy. But here is the final thing I want to talk about. So I just talked about Monsoon's blade that he got, right? So that implies that he takes all of the other weapons from the other fighters that he's, beaten along the way. And actually, during the climactic fight of the game against Armstrong, he's able to get Sam's sword. And the reason this is so insane is that not only is Sam's sword a high-frequency weapon, but his is like a high-frequency weapon among high-frequency weapons. And let me just go over some of the things that they say about these high-frequency weapons. It gives them the ability to cut things at the atomic level, and the particles of his blade can change at a quantum level, even being able to affect things down to the Planck level, and as our good boy Doc says, pretty much just nullifying all of the laws of physics that we know about. The reason I'm saving this towards the very end is that this is where things can get insanely OP, because for one, being able to like bisect things at the atom and even beyond that down to like the Planck of the item pretty much means that like physical durability is just not going to be a thing if you're fighting Sam. This does pose the question though of like Armstrong being able to block Sam's blade, and you can make some really fun arguments about whatever nanomachines Armstrong has being beyond all physics, and that it just gets into an even larger rabbit hole if you want to wank these characters to just being absurdly stronger than they should be. But again, it is there. Have fun arguing that in the comments and, going up to your friends and being like, Armstrong is 1A, or something along those lines, right? But it's just the insane implications of this statement and what you can actually do with it. Now, from a standard interpretation, it should literally just mean that physical durability, really not a thing if you're fighting Sam or Raiden. Unless you've got whatever Armstrong has, or you have some like insane physical durability that allows you to bypass atomic separation, stuff along those lines. You could also just argue that maybe it's just really precise. Maybe it's not anything super OP, but it's like, oh, if he's like cutting things down to like the Planck length, right? That just means he is super, super precise in the way that he's able to cut things. It's not really like anything that should be wanked and should be really OP. It's just he's really precise. Like, he's never gonna miss. But the fact that, like, the description is still the same, whether or not Raiden or Sam is using it, like, it doesn't change at all, does imply that that's not really the case, because you would assume that that's just because of, like, Sam's swordsmanship and not, like, the sword is, like, auto-aiming for you. So I'm just gonna leave you guys with that at the very end here. That little insane tidbit that they just randomly threw in one of the codex when you're talking about Sam's sword. But I would love to hear what you guys think in the comments down below. I definitely went for a little bit more of a different style, more of a different approach to this, because Metal Gear is really something I'm not really familiar with at all. But a friend of mine asked me to make the video, and I was like, you know what, it's been a couple of months, let me go ahead and actually get this. I know I've talked about doing the Armstrong video for a couple of months now, and then just changed to Raiden at the last second here. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm sure there are like a few things lore related that I got wrong that someone will definitely correct me in the comments down below. But for someone who just kind of dived into the series head first, I think this video came out pretty well, and I think you should have a really good idea of how strong Raiden would be if you pit him up against people. Speaking of which, feel free to drop suggestions for any Metal Gear Rising Revengeance characters down in the comments down below. We can do Armstrong versus somebody, we can do Sam versus someone, Raiden. Those are really the only three that I care about. Maybe the dog, the wolf is pretty cool. But yeah, leave those all in the comments down below, and I will probably be back in like a week, for either a Jalter video or a Bleach video. I haven't really decided yet. The Jalter one is pretty much already done, but I would like to kind of alternate between non-Bleach content and Bleach content, so I probably will hit you guys with a Bleach video next week. I don't know, you'll just have to wait and see. Not like I have a schedule or anything, but yeah, with all that being said, I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace late, guys.